Hey everybody and welcome back to my channel. If you're a returning viewer, please consider subscribing. And if you are a subscriber, thank you very much. As you can see today, I have a very special guest.
Hi everyone, my name is Lindsay. My background is in mental health counseling and psychology, and I'm in private practice in Winter Park, Florida, and I specialize in LGBTQ+ mental health. I identify as a pansexual queer femme. My attraction really is more about the person than the parts. I am in a same-sex relationship. And this is Roxy. She is my 3-month-old Corgi Healer puppy and my therapy dog in training.
She's also my shameless attempt at getting more views. Can I hold her?
You sure can.
All right. Ooh.
She's so soft.
Aww.
Full name is actually Roxanne, Roxy for short. So
Roxanne.
If you like the police, you could break into song at any point now.
Just like I just did. What we're about to talk about is a kind of controversial topic, I would say. So there have been a lot of videos made recently about transphobia, which I like to call preference versus prejudice. The reason I'm having you on, Lindsay, is for your professional opinion, because to be honest, I could have made a video talking about this on my own and it would have been my opinion. I haven't seen anybody bring any mental health professionals into this.
Why don't we take a look at what transphobia really is?
What is it?
When we think about transphobia, like if you actually break the word down, phobia is a fear. So technically, it's this fear of transgender people or the idea of transgenderism. But I would encourage us to kind of flip that around a little bit. It's really a fear of how a group of people affects us and our identity. Say we have a child coming out to his religious parents. The homophobia that might be coming up in the lives of his or her parents is this idea of what will it say about me as a religious person if I accept my gay daughter or my gay son. It's not that the parents fear their gay child is going to physically harm them in any way. It's how is this relationship changing and how do I see myself differently in the context of this now out gay person. So it's same with transphobia. How is my identity influenced by my acceptance, my relationship, my connection with a transgender person, whether it's in a bathroom or whether it's in a dating relationship?
I've seen a lot of these videos are being made by a lot of lesbians. A lot of them have said, how do I deal with my sexual orientation if I allow trans women to be defined as a lesbian? There have been arguments made like, if you were really a lesbian, then why are you attracted to that lesbian woman who has a masculine body? You know, why aren't you just dating a guy? And then when you bring in a trans woman, I think there's some fear by lesbians that kind of weakens their entire arguments that they've been making the entire time against those things.
And back to what the phobia is, less about the other person as it is about our identity. And it could go one step further. I might be okay with it, but then what are my peers going to say? What are fellow lesbians going to say? What are my, straight parents going to say? Like,
Right.
Why don't you just date a man then?
What is a lesbian?
That's definitely going to depend on who you ask, right?
Right, sure.
So there are going to be people who identify lesbianism as a romantic and sexual attraction to femaleness, the aspect of femininity in its large spectrum. Then there's going to be groups of people who really see it more as the sexual component. And that's where the genitals come into play.
It all seems to come down to genitals at the end of the day. Trans women with penises inspire all sorts of fear about what it says about those people who are attracted to those women. So there's some people out there who will vehemently say that trans women aren't women and that we then can't be lesbians. Then there's folks out there who say that trans women are women. However, a trans woman with a penis isn't a lesbian.
It's sounding like if you're in that conversation that they might be really heavily relying on anatomy to define womanhood and therefore to define lesbianism. And so I think that's why this conversation is so tricky. What words are we using and do we even have the same definition of what those words mean? And I think the answer is we don't. We're not all on the same page.
They're arguing about the definition of woman. Trans people can sometimes be caught right in the middle of it. We're not born with all the parts that are supposed to identify us as biologically female. I know as a trans woman myself, I had these feelings of being a woman or being somehow feminine, and I did not have a biological basis to make that statement.
If we're going to be looking at anatomy and biological sex and genitalia, that's one side of the spectrum. And if we're going to be looking again at this concept of femaleness, whether it's presentation, energy, simply identity, if you identify as a woman, I accept you as a woman. That's on the other side of the spectrum. Transgender people are trying to navigate this gender binary, and there's a lot of people who are very attached to a particular definition of womanhood. So underneath all of those different different attitudes are what we would call underlying core beliefs.
Right.
So core beliefs about my identity, whether I identify as a lesbian and what that means to me and about me. An underlying core belief about transgender people, underlying core beliefs about transgender women, and underlying core beliefs about women. They're pretty rigid. They're often formed early in life through experiences, socialization, culture, religion, messaging, and they're usually within our subconscious. We don't really think about them. When we start to bring that subconscious material to our awareness, we can then get a perspective on them. We can kind of create some distance around them, and we can integrate our other experiences, and then we can make a decision. Is this underlying core belief serving me, or do I want to change it?
How do we do that?
So the first step is definitely awareness. Just through that natural act of speaking and dialoguing and asking questions and getting curious, we're bringing material up and we're kind of confronting ourselves with our belief systems in the way that we think. And the more curious we can get and the less defensive we can be, the more open-minded we're going to be, and the more we're going to be able to receive other people's opinions, and the more we're going to be able to non-judgmentally see ourselves. Because defensiveness is really this fear of being judged. We sort of put up this wall so that other people will see us in a particular way, so that we don't have to feel the guilt of being judged in a negative way.
I think that judgment is a couple different things. In terms of phobia, like as we were talking about earlier, but also in terms of how we see ourselves as good people.
If you identify as a good person, you're not going to want to be transphobic. And it's really hard to look at maybe those shadow parts of ourselves, maybe the prejudices that we might be carrying around unbeknownst to us.
Because a lot of these videos I've seen, they'll basically say, well, it's just my preference. I am not attracted to trans women, or I'm not attracted to penises. All these things that people identify as being associated with being transgender, or at least a transgender woman.
So if we were to kind of break down preference and prejudice, looking at the word preference, it's when we have, we're aware of different options and we have a tendency towards a particular choice. I like desserts and I have a preference for chocolate desserts, whereas you may have a preference for lemon desserts.
Right.
So that's just an example.
Go ahead.
But in order to have a preference, there needs to be some degree of awareness of other options. But there's also this concept, this acknowledgement that we can have a preference and not actually know all of the options. So if I've never been exposed to a chocolate dessert, I'm gonna think that maybe lemon desserts are my favorite. Then all of a sudden I get exposed to chocolate desserts and my whole life has been transformed. Preferences can evolve. Prejudice, if we break down that word, the PRE at the front of it, is this idea of preconceived notions, prejudgments about people. And they're often not based in our own life experiences. They're very frequently based in information that is fed to us through culturalization, socialization, social norms, parenting, religion. We've seen as LGBT people in the evolution of the LGBT movement, as individuals who are vehemently opposed to us in many ways, as they got to know us as people, a lot of those prejudices, those preconceived notions fell away. And that is why you often see parents who previously were homophobic changing their attitudes a lot if a child comes out, because their preconceived notions of their child don't match the preconceived notions they had of LGBT people.
Wow, that's really complex.
It is.
Very enlightening. Thank you so much.
And just to be clear, at no point is this about forcing people to try things that they're not comfortable with trying, or to adopt a part of their identity that they don't feel is congruent to them.
I think, to be honest, the transgender community has gone a little bit too far, using the word transphobia or transphobic as a weapon, beating allies into submission with this word, and it makes me very uncomfortable. We are, in a way, trying to shame people into doing something that they need to get to on their own by self-introspection and say, where do these feelings come from? And I think when you do something like that, that word is so highly charged that it shuts down the conversation from going any further.
That's when those walls come up, the defensiveness, because if you don't identify as someone who has transphobic thoughts or beliefs and someone calls you transphobic, that can be a real shock. And that's going to affect the way that you see yourself, potentially in a negative way. This is about understanding that underneath preferences, there could be prejudice, but there might not be. Right. The only way you know is when you get curious about yourself.
I think we still do believe that people have the ultimate decision. They have body autonomy. We're not trying to say that, like you were saying, we're not forcing anybody to say, you have to sleep with a trans woman with a penis. But if you have that curiosity,
and then you find yourself pulling back, Ask yourself why. You know, you're in a club, you see a woman across the dance floor who you're super attracted to, you get up the courage to go over and talk to her, you're hitting it off, you're still feeling attracted. Somehow in the conversation, she brings up that she identifies as a transgender woman.
In that moment,
that person's definition of lesbian is going to be tested. What that person says might be congruent with that definition. Okay, no problem. For me, it's about attraction, and that's where it stops. For other people, that might be very incongruent with their definition, their lesbian identity. And then all of a sudden, you kind of shut down, and that feeling of attraction pulls back, and you have this automatic response of, oh, well, you know, this isn't gonna go anywhere then. Just so you know, I don't date transgender women. You did feel attracted, you were open to this person, you wanted to get to know them, you might have even felt the desire to sleep with them, and then something shut that down.
Where does that feeling come from?
My mentor always described feelings as a tap on the shoulder that something needs to be healed. This is new, maybe it's uncomfortable, it threatens potentially my identity. That's enough to shut a person down completely. So what we're saying is get curious. What just happened? And I always say, the second I stop getting curious about myself, why I think the way I think, feel the way I feel, do what I do, is the moment I abandon myself and everybody I care about.
Whoa.
Because then I don't know if I'm showing up authentically or not. I don't know why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. And it can not just affect me, but it's going to affect the people around me, particularly the people I love and care about the most.
I think it'd be very comforting not to examine yourself.
This is all about self-examination and seeing what's underneath there and being okay with what you find. And if you're not okay with what you find, being willing to say, I'm going to do something about it. That's what that therapeutic process is.
And now you know why I went to her for like a year. We're going to talk about this on both sides of the argument that's being made, which is that a lesbian who's attracted to a trans woman with a penis doesn't mean necessarily that she's not a lesbian.
Absolutely.
By the same token, a lesbian who doesn't want to sleep with a transgender woman who has a penis isn't necessarily transphobic.
Also would agree with that. So if we get into the space of if this plus this always equals this without any flexibility or open-mindedness, we're just setting ourselves up to disagree, because identity is not math. What we're talking about is not that black and white. It's not that simple. We love black and white thinking because it makes us feel safe.
At the end of the day, I think it comes down to fear.
So the phobia does make sense. It's just not the way that we have traditionally thought about it.
Well, that was all very deep. If you guys like Lindsay, you know, let me know. I will be more than happy to bring her back. Or Roxy. Roxy was so quiet and she was.
She's a little sleepy.
Video.
Love to be back.
On that note, like, share, and subscribe, and see you around the interwebs.